is it maybe Nepal or Nepalese now should think on like more of a like not based on what you want, but what the country needs, right? We might say like we would like to have this kind of a system, but will it be compatible to our problem? Right? It's a two different thing. We might want to have certain system, but due to many circumstances, like in geopolitical context or in our ethnically very diverse population, like we might need to reconsider certain things on like what actually is required to run the country, or we might just say like, I want this and let's try this system is a different thing, and our requirement might be different than what actually we think of, right?
I think that may be true, but I think it's very difficult to distinguish, your own individual ambitions from those for the country, but because your own individual ambitions have to be realistic. Okay, I mean, people may dream of some things, but they also then have to compromise, and maybe the compromise at the moment is you look for a job in Croatia. It may seem bizarre. That also has its own dynamic. It means more people going abroad, more people. But to return to some sort of foundational economy, it doesn't seem to me is possible for Nepal. So people have moved away from agriculture. That was the foundation. When I came in the 1970s, 85-90% of people were not just living in the rural areas, but they had their income, their livelihoods from agriculture and related. Now, you can't go back to that. People will not want to go back to the hard work, the toil, short lives, difficult lives of agriculture.
No services there.
No, so you can't go backwards. The same, industrial, you have hardly any industrial development in Nepal at all now. In fact, it's gone backwards from what it was in the 1930s, 40s perhaps. Again, people will be very reluctant to go back to working in factories in the way they used to before. So the question in my mind is, how do you fit individual ambitions for a reasonable life with the realities of Nepal's geographical and resource base? It's a very small country in some ways. 30 million people is not big. Most of it is, in difficult terrain. And most people now, more people, I'm not sure what the percentage is, are living in urban areas, which have to be sustained somehow. And you can't produce your way out of, an urban living. You have to rely on other people somewhere else.
David, can we agree to disagree on some certain things, right?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Most of the people that have gone abroad are actually working on farms, looking after cattle in, let's say, Middle East, and picking up fruits somewhere in the Middle East, and citizens going to Malaysia are actually working on factories. They are actually working hard on those fields. If those were here, they can do that job. They can actually work hard. The problem here is they don't have it here, so they need to go there, and they're doing the same job. That means they can come back and do the same thing here.
No, because you can't build the industries here. You can't have the same sorts of things. They're not there. There are virtually no industries. Now, there is a certain amount of reindustrialization you could do. Very limited.
We have to rebuild the entire ecosystem.
But you see, for a small economy, which is 90% dependent on imports from India, to do that would be hugely difficult. It required a defensive, national, isolationist economy, because you would have to be able to compete somehow with producing things in Nepal that they produce in India and Malaysia easily, because they have much more capital investment and so on. I mean, And the fact is, sorry, to be honest, the people who are working abroad in the Gulf are not working on farms, but there are very few farms in those. Where they are maybe picking fruit and so on, but they're in construction work largely. Yeah. They're working in the airports. Everybody, when I come through to Nepal, I usually go through either Doha or Dubai. Everyone there is from South Asia. Everybody speaks Hindi or Nepali or Urdu. And they're working in service sectors in incredibly wealthy countries with opportunities that cannot exist in Nepal. Mm-hmm. Nepal has a great deal of difficulty in even constructing an international airport at Bhairava. There isn't the demand, there isn't the capital, there isn't the investment. So when you say we could build factories in Nepal, not now. Why? How could they possibly build? Who would do it? Mm-hmm. Who would be investing? Would it be government? Private investors say, no, I'm not investing in Nepal to produce things that you can get from India half the price. Mm-hmm. You have to recognise you're landlocked. You're in a particular position with certain constraints and so on. You can't wish an integrated, self-reliant economy. You were talking earlier, Dipak, I think, about the real economy is what will matter in the future. Mm-hmm. The problem for Nepal is the basis for a real economy is very limited. It's the same problem we have in Britain. We have abandoned agriculture. I think lower than 3% of the population in Britain is involved in agriculture.
Wow.
Very tiny. They have a big influence on them, but in reality it's very small. And it's highly mechanized. And basically we produce a very small proportion. We import our food. We're like Nepal. So we could not have an agrarian agricultural base. Mm-hmm. We used to have steelworks. We used to have manufacturing centres and so on. Increasingly, they're not competitive. We're just about to close down our last remaining steelworks. We cannot compete with Taiwan, with Korea, with so on. And you can't go backwards. You can't go backwards.
But in my view, this is where I try to be optimistic in this very, dark scenario you painted. If globalization ends, as it is in a sense ending, won't countries be forced to go for localization? Which means, I'm not talking about Nepal making iPhones tomorrow, but the point is, I'm wearing clothes. This cloth is Nepali, and the tailor was Nepali. So, in a sense, I don't have to have Gucci and Armani, and they're high-priced. But even clothes coming from, let's say, China or India, I don't need to. Now, it just needs a government here. In Nepal, there's a movement. I don't know whether you're aware of it. Among the they call them right wing, but Nepal is a place where these terms right wing and left wing are just collapsed. When you have left wing Maoists, more right wing than right wing RPP, there's something seriously wrong with these terms. So, but there is this feeling of going back to what was our founding basis in Nepal, Prithvi Narayan's Dibya Upadesh, and argument is Prithvi Path, the path of Prithvi. So, where he basically says in Dibya Upadesh that, don't just buy things from outside, get those things and see if your own artisans can make them, your own tailors can make them, In that way, money will not go out of the country. Now, he said this in Dibya Upadesh. This is very basic. People would laugh at it when globalization was in full swing. But now that localization is back, won't we be forced to do this?
You can't. It's my view. I mean, some countries will be able to, yes. The US is interesting because it's huge. And although it's deindustrialized, it has a lot of resources. It still has fracking. It has oil. So in my view, the Trump idea is a possible development. You can make America self-reliant again, largely. Russia is huge with resources. I mean, there are countries Nigeria, there are countries that could do that. You need a government that would have to sort of put huge taxes on imports. You'd have import substitution. I mean, it's a classic development theory, import substitution. Instead of buying it from abroad, you make it yourself. You then employ people, and they have wages, they can buy goods. And of course, you can do it with some things. Yeah, Nepal could do a limited amount in production. Hemp, it could regrow certain crops. It could then manufacture hemp and some clothing. But you'd have to keep out, Bangladeshi and Indian and other goods that are much cheaper. So, limited possibilities, but not in the hills. It would have to be in the Tarai. You can go back to that sort of production to some extent. You won't go back to agriculture as it was. People will not be prepared to do that. They just won't. It's hard work. You can't survive on that basis. Mm. So I hear what both of you are saying, and there is an extent to which you can do that, relocalize, and but it does require a particular economic strategy, and it's very costly. And for small economies which have moved away from that, you can't. There's some things you can't go back to. You can't rebuild. It's not possible anymore. And that, we talk about artisans. Yes, you can encourage people to carve and make gagri and so on, but all those skills are gone. You'd have to retrain. It's incredibly difficult. My sense is that for most economies, and I include mine as well, there's no going back. So you have to find a new niche. And it's not clear to me what that would be. In a China-dominated world, you'd have to be doing something different. And it may be that you just really do have a decline in living standards. To me, it's a political question. Because in my country, certainly, and I think in Nepal as well, very few people are very wealthy, and most people are not very wealthy. So the control of that and redistribution and so on is a very important thing. That's a real political issue.
But don't you think... my concern is that we'll probably be forced into it if we are not foresighted enough. Mm-hmm. We'll probably be forced into a situation where, there's nothing for, let's say, India and Bangladesh with, populations the size they have. They might be forced tomorrow to feed their own population first, clothe their own population first, before they can even export anything.
Yeah, maybe.
That scenario might come, which means that we are going to be in a situation where remittances might start drying out with global recession. It means that we can't just import our way out of the problem. I don't see, and this is where my pessimism comes in, I don't see the political vision among a political class, especially the younger ones I'm talking about, including Gen Z, that sees the danger up ahead, let's say 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, and has a political philosophy that can handle it, which is why I thought, what we put up before, your book, Nepal in Crises, it was that time in the late 70s and 80s, it was so important because it set into motion a set of debates. Mm-hmm. We, of course, went in the wrong way with the structural adjustment of the IMF and all in the 80s, and eventually the collapse of the panchayat system, and then the deindustrialization of Nepal with the multi-party government, Nepali Congress and UML coming in, Marxist-Leninist, that started selling away the factories built by the panchayat and not really privatization. It was not privatization because privatization, the idea behind it is that, okay, when there's no market, the government has to step in and create the market, create a factory, whatever. But once things are already running, it's the private sector that can do it more efficiently.
It should be.
What happened was with the paper factory, with the shoe factory in Baswari, paper factory in Narani, cigarette factory, they sold it for land speculation. So it was not real privatization in that sense. So my pessimism comes from the fact that we are not seeing a political debate in Nepal. We are not seeing a political, leadership emerging that is able to address this danger and attract Nepalis and say that, listen, these guys are talking sense. Like, for instance, in the late 40s and early 50s, Nepali Congress dominated that kind of a thinking. BP Koirala's every Nepali should have a small house and 2 cows and whatever he said, It was a political imagination that captured. Later, after your book came out, the UML started capturing that political imagination. They, of course, went the wrong way. And then came the Maoists who have today have proved that they don't have an atom of Mao in them. I don't know where we're headed. But this is where my problem is, that eventually maybe we'll be forced to, but then that will be a very unpleasant forcing.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you. I think that there is a failure of imagination about alternative strategies for development, not just in Nepal, but certainly in my own country, in Britain as well. People are obsessed with the immediate politics, and they follow the immediate opportunities. So if you're a young person, you look abroad, because that's what other people are doing. So it's a sort of tailism, So I think there is a lack of thinking. A lot of the great giants of economic thought in the 19th century and early 20th century, they aren't so visible these days, I think. And this is why, to my own surprise, I find myself increasingly interested in the Trump strategy, which is, is doing precisely, it's trying to do what you're saying, is go back, rebuild, support our own industries, support our farmers. Now, he's going about it in very much the wrong way. But that idea of making America great again is exactly, I think, what you're talking about in theory.
Making Nepal great.
Make Nepal great again. Mana.